item 8.3, District Growth Strategy Draft Proposal. It's on page 96 of your report. Natasha, are you going to give an overview before Hamish takes over? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, elected members, Mr Mayor. So this piece of work here is significant for the district. There is quite an extensive process that has been gone through, particularly with elected members over the last 9 or 10 months now. I think the first was in December. And so it's really pleasing to get to this point where we've got a consultation document conveying the draft approach to growth of the district over the next 30 years. We know that growth does pose a range of challenges and opportunities for the district, and it's really important for the council to be setting out a direction and to take the opportunity to shape how the district grows over time. This means that rather than dealing with it in an ad hoc and reactive way, it better enables us to plan ahead and appropriately sequence things like infrastructure and other services and facilities, and help keep things like climate change in front of mind as we look to where growth occurs and what growth looks like. It also provides us with the opportunity to protect what people value most about Kapiti. So we do need to recognise that we are facing significant population growth in the district, and we have an obligation also to meet under the National Policy Statement on Urban Development to provide development capacity for our forecast population growth. So I'll hand over to Hamish, who's going to take you through a little bit more of the detail of what's in the document, and then we'll be happy to take questions.
Hamish.
Morena, Mr Mayor, Councillors, and also I'd just like to say welcome to our iwi partners, Natalia and Kirsten as well, so thank you, nice to see you here. And thanks for that, Natasha, provided a really good overview. And we are here today to seek your approval to go out for consultation on the draft proposed for growth about, sorry, I'm just getting it in front of me, growing well, and I think that's quite apt, and we'll come back to the opportunity and challenges I think that we've mentioned already about some of the housing pressures just talking about now is increasing even further under the current COVID conditions, as well as some of those challenges around climate change for the future, and how we balance that is really key and important focus for where we look to go and what we want to achieve over the next 30 years, which is the time frame we're looking at under the proposed district growth strategy that we're looking to develop around this proposed consultation document. I was just going to touch a little bit on the process to date. As Natasha mentioned, we've been working for just under a year now, a range of discussions with yourselves, working through some of the components of what a vision for growth, good growth looks like for Kapiti over the next 30 years, with some of those challenges and opportunities that growth brings. And I'll touch on some of those aspects within the document itself soon. But as well as discussions with yourselves, we've also taken the opportunity alongside the long-term plan processes to seek and get some guidance and direction from the community and other key stakeholders about what good growth looks like and some of these pressures and challenges as well. And that's come together and culminated in what we have now, which is the proposed approach. And we're keen to go out and test that further and get some feedback about what some of that work around the visioning and kind of packaging around growth and what that could look like for Kapiti. Touching on two key points that Natasha also mentioned, is there's work already going on about regional growth as well. The Wellington Regional Growth Framework has now been adopted, and that seeks to set out how we're looking to grow with that significant growth across the region as a whole, up into our neighbours in the Hota Whenua area as well. And in particularly, what Kapiti's role in that is quite important, because we sit right in the middle of the Western Corridor where there's quite significant, I think it's approximately 40% of the growth anticipated across the region is from Tawa up to Levin. Kapiti sits right in the middle of that area, and so it's quite important about what our role is. And the work that we're talking about here will actually provide the picture, the vision, and also the pathway, the blueprint for how we see ourselves going and achieving that and fitting within that. And importantly, it also helps meet some of those requirements that we're required under the government's National Policy Statement on Urban Development to meet. So that includes how we actually provide enough land for our growing housing and business requirements, and also how we actually provide the infrastructure to support that. It needs to be planned alongside it. And there's also additional requirements about how we actually enable intensification around some key areas. and there's some minimum requirements there that we're expected to meet that are enshrined within the proposed approach that we have developed with your help. So the document itself, Growing Well, as it's currently framed, you would have had a chance hopefully to have a read through it. It provides some key components to what that proposed approach for growing for Kapiti looks like. Sets out some key context around some of those challenges and opportunities and framing growth linked to our long-term plan, some of the wider district challenges and those key community outcomes we're seeking to achieve. We also have a core section in there focusing on the principles and priorities we seek to achieve, the 6 principles we've worked through with you, and some of the supporting priorities and aspirations that will help articulate and guide the direction that Council takes and how we work with our partners and through our own work and strategies and other planning and infrastructure investment processes as well to help shape what that future looks like. A key part of the document itself is actually physically what that looks like on the ground. So this is where we talk about future areas for development with a key focus around intensification of our current existing areas, but also looking at how we layer and support those areas with greenfield areas that can actually help form good urban development over time, support our communities as they grow, while keeping our unique character and villages connected, providing better infrastructure services and services full stop, particularly around social, education, schools, other social infrastructure and community infrastructure as part of that picture. And the last component that we have that's quite pivotal to the strategy and the approach that we're taking overall is the implementation about how we'll actually deliver it. The growth strategy itself sets out a broad framework and approach, but by and of itself, it's not much without the key components being put into effect underneath it. So the relationship and how we work together with partners, but through some of those tools, such as the district plan and some of the regional growth framework planning together, are quite important, and the implementation plan will support the details that will come through for how we'll deliver on those principles and those aspirations that we set out in the plan, and what we look for Kapiti and our community and residents. So we're looking to go out and engage on this proposed approach with our community and test it over a month from October 19th to November 19th. And get out with the community and yourselves and engage and get some feedback on what the proposed approach looks like, with a mind to actually finalising the strategy early in the new year. And as we've discussed before, some of the timeframes and key dependencies are that we have an urban development plan change underway that this will actually help shape and inform. That's got a time frame to meet for next year. Mid-next year it needs to be notified. So this will actually help start informing and shaping what that approach looks like going forward. As well as informing some key infrastructure thinking and planning ahead of the next long-term plan. Goes hand in hand with some of this work. A core component of that is that we're looking to continue to engage and work with our iwi partners as we look to develop up further, and also in particular ensure that we actually reflect the aspirations and the values of all of our iwi partners within that approach for growth in the future, and in particular getting the balance right with wider environmental concerns and aspirations in there as well. So notwithstanding, before I ask the questions, the only other thing I was just going to draw attention to is that we circulated yesterday some changes and updates to some of the areas proposed as part of the future growth, in particular around some of the greenfield areas, seeking to align with some of the recent discussions that we've had. And we'll be just seeking to look to include those within the final draft when we seek your approval for consultation and consideration. So without further ado, happy to take any questions that there might be.
First one off the block, Councillor McCann. I'm not surprised.
But you're excited, Mr. Mayor, and
Absolutely.
thank you very much. Look, I do want to congratulate the staff on the way that this has been handled over a very long period of time with a lot of briefings. So we've had the opportunity to ask many, many questions. One of the ones that we've only started talking about recently is the engagement and planning, point 35, 36 and the publicity. And what I'm concerned about, and I think it's a point Councillor Cootes has also raised, is the interconnectivity of all of these moving pieces and can we explain how this is not a piece on its own? I'm worried about trying to get that message through and how much we need to actually do that so people don't see this as a wishy-washy document and then don't understand that actually it's feeding into a lot of concrete actions. Will we get a chance to see that full engagement plan? Will we get a chance to work on it or contribute to it?
I know at the moment we're developing up the approach, and we've engaged about how we engage on the specifics about across the communities. And I think we had a session recently with our community boards and got some really good feedback on how each of our community boards would like to be engaged with sessions and the ability to have discussion and feedback, obviously subject to COVID and COVID notwithstanding. I'm also quite aware that we're working in part of the messaging, and we've had some recent articles going out leading up to this process about some of the key linkages around the growth strategy and its fit. So that includes, alongside the draft proposed approach that we're going out with, we're also consulting on a draft open space strategy. So we've been having some strong messaging around that, and also the fit and trying to articulate how the strategy fits within our long-term plan as well has been quite a core focus, because growing and managing growth was one of the core elements under that as well.
And while I notice you didn't answer the question, I do get that, and it's in the document, but in terms of our comms, and we're often realise that people need some of that information. They're not going to read the document, but they'll read the headlines. Are we able to feed into some of that comms too? Because there are a range of options about how we communicate this.
Yep. I can certainly liaise with our communication staff. So sorry, the other side of it is we have preparing some FAQs and some context to support the discussions around it. So I can certainly liaise with the communications team to see how we can facilitate that and ensuring that we're possibly identifying some of the questions that we might expect on the ground and how we can actually provide a good response about the fit and other aspects of the process as well. So I can come back to you on that.
Thank you very much. Another question is around about the actual rate of growth. I think all the councillors and all the discussions that I've had.
Sorry, Natasha was going to add an answer, and so you all got switched off. Sorry. So if we let her do that, and we then, if you remember the order you were in, we'll give it a go, shall we?
Thank you. I was just going to add in there that if there are particular questions that elected members have got that they would like to make sure that we answer through the comms material to be provided, then please let us know, and we can make sure that those are covered off.
You done?
We're back, part two. One of the questions that most councillors have agreed on is that there is going to be significant growth. How do we have confidence that the estimates for the growth that are being presented to us are accurate? And I'm aware that there is some work that's being delayed that could have actually assisted with that in the Wellington, with Horowhenua and ourselves. Could you explain to councillors what our response is should the growth numbers that we have actually be too low?
I guess first of all, the preparation of our population and household dwelling projections has been undertaken on a regional basis. So it's just not us having one set of numbers that suits Kapiti. It's actually a joined up and consistent regional approach. And that's been undertaken by Sense Partners, who are nationally recognised economics projections house. Shamabeel Equa works for them as well, but they're quite known and doing a lot of projections work across councils. And that piece of work has actually supported the projections for all districts across the region. And they do provide some ranges, and there is a very clear methodology and assumptions like all modelling in there. But a very robust process that they've undertaken, and that's also supporting a lot of the work and very similar to the regional growth framework discussions and also the extent of growth being looked at in there. So that is kind of a way and mechanism that I guess a robustness has moderated the approach across the region as a whole. It's not just Kapiti. I'm not sure if that
Can I, through you, Mr. Chair, if I just add a comment from my perspective? One of the frustrations that many of us have had in the past is the stats version of distributing population growth based on non-local factors. Sense partners, and other consultants that we've used sometimes do just look at an individual council or region and not take account of the national perspective. Sense partners, as I understand it, their model does actually look across all of New Zealand, which I think is very important, that it's trying to do both things, look across the whole country and then understand local variations that will influence growth positively or negatively. And so we're actually quite comfortable both in terms of the methodology that they're using, that it's as robust as you can have, because we all know that whatever number we think it'll be, it won't be. That's the only thing we do know. And because it's a long run projection, we've got time every 2 or 3 years to revisit that and make sure that we're adapting to change in that. But the other thing that gives me some comfort is, as it happens, the forecast long-run growth largely matches our 30 years of history of long-run growth. And I think there's something to be said for that does recognise local factors, our proximity to Wellington and what happens there, and so on. The thing that none of us can account for is another COVID or an ongoing COVID, and those sorts of factors that actually significantly impact on our overall growth as a country. So we can't allow for those things that might cause change, and so there'll always be caveats, but perhaps that final point that every 2 to 3 years when we're reviewing this, we'll make sure we're adapting to change.
And the final question, Mr. Mayor, is because there's so many interconnected pieces of work and we're asking for feedback, how do we as a council make sure that, say, feedback to this process that actually is for the district plan, that we try and capture that? Because I think every councillor is aware of the amount of consultation and engagement that is occurring right throughout our community, and we don't want to make it hard for people when they've already commented and then the next piece comes up and they think, well, I've already said that. How do we make sure we capture, and can we capture, comments that are interrelated to the next piece of work?
I think that's going to be quite pivotal and important that we do, because again, the growth strategy itself is integrated through a variety of mechanisms and tools. And so I guess a key point of success for a strategy is to be able to coordinate and help achieve its vision and aspirations through aligning and those actions underneath it. So again, the strategy itself will help inform and shape work under the district plan. So it goes hand in hand, is quite complementary to feeding that through. So we'll be working alongside that process to help shape what that looks like. And other strategies as well, where relevant, we'll be looking to identify and link.
Can I just cut in there, Rob? Paragraph 5 talks about the strategies sitting alongside the other council strategies, and it's a whole heap of them. There's an issue that I've raised several times before, is the ability of each of those things to be talking to each other. The Chief Executive did tell us that that's what's happening. I'm not sure whether the councillors are comfortable or realise that's happening and how it's happening. Straight away we had to hit on. Rob, you would agree that we don't.
I agree that the general community often don't know it's happening. Those people who are connected to this piece of work probably have been asking the same questions, so they do know it's happening, but I don't think the general public do. What I'm worried about as we head towards communicating is, have we raised those issues and put them at the front end of the communication enough? That's a question I don't have an answer to, but it's a concern.
Yeah, the direction I'm heading is paragraph 5 is a critical piece of information. Do we, councillors around the table, understand the push and pull factors between all those strategies? That's the question. Chief Executive.
So one of the conversations that Hamish and I have been having is to turn it into something a little bit visual that says "you are here," because I think that's what you all need. What we bring forward to you is one strategy at a time, or one policy piece of work, or one project that delivers on them. You start with your vision and the outcomes you want. Here's the strategies that are going to deliver it to you, and here's how they weave together. Here's, if you like, the roadmap with the action plan that they're going to deliver on, and they'll cross all sorts of places. So does our transport plan acknowledge the changing landscape in terms of how people get around the district, for example? So short answer is yes. You know, I think what we're agreeing on is what that like little framework might look like, and that we can go, okay, you are here, and okay, the silo you're in today is the growth strategy, but the silo you were in a couple of weeks ago was the open spaces strategy. So whilst it can seem like you're only dealing with one thing at a time, how do we see them together? I did give you the assurance that they are all, as much as we can, interlinked as cleverly as we can. And how can we show you that visually? And so Hamish is working on a little piece of stuff that we're thinking through. And the way I see it is it'll sort of go, okay, here's our overarching picture, and you are here at the moment. And it'll kind of draw out, this is the point in that you're at. So that might help eventually.
Hopefully the eventually doesn't take so long where it's all fossilized before we see it.
Can I also just add, alongside but slightly separately, I mean, the purpose of our implementation plan at the back of this is to try and articulate how aspects and components of the district plan and other instruments and vehicles fit together as well, so we can actually look at including that in some of the front-ending messaging as well to help provide some clarity around how the bits come together and relate to growth strategy a bit more.
Thank you. I think it's really helpful and gives us great confidence in what is really complex.
Councillor Hanford.
Thank you, Councillor Hanford. I just wanted to clarify something, yes, way back down the back, just in terms of the last response that Hamish gave to Councillor McCann's question. While we certainly, feedback that comes in on this, we're certainly going to look at how it themes from that and how it might apply to subsequent and related pieces of work. I do think in relation to the district plan, it's important that I just make really clear that is a separate statutory process, and if people have got concerns about what's in the district plan or views about what's in the district plan, that they don't assume that input on the growth strategy is going to give them standing under the district plan process as well. So I just wanted to make that really clear. Thank you.
Councillor McCann.
Read. There we go. Just on that clarification, and I understand it legally, is there some shortcuts that we can make sure when we're receiving the information it's going to be directly relevant to the next thing, where we can just let them know legally you'll need to resupply this so it is taken into consideration in the next iteration? Because I'm just, the general public do not understand, there's a chance that they will not understand that they need to supply the same advice 4 times on 4 different pieces, of consultation. And I don't think we should expect them to understand that they need to keep repeating themselves. It's not a criticism, I'm just trying to find a workaround.
Right.
Here we go. You certainly acknowledge that it is really difficult for people to access and understand some of those, some of the legalities there. We can certainly look at how we can build up a contact list, if you like, of people who have expressed an interest that we might like to communicate with around the district plan once we get to that point. One of the challenges, I guess, is going to come down to the volume of people that may relate to and how we can accommodate that. So where we're talking about a smallish group of people, I think it's going to be much easier for us to be able to facilitate that than if we end up getting a significant number of significant amount of feedback on the growth strategy.
Right. I've got Sophie Hanford next.
Cool. If it's okay, Mr. Mayor, can I kind of through you pose a question to Natalia and Kirsten? Is that?
Are they happy with that?
Yeah. Question to either of you or to both of you is whether mana whenua have any specific methodologies or solutions moving forward that you see aren't represented or should be strengthened in the proposed approach. And just wanting to understand where your thinking is at really, and if you wanted to explain more the methodology, the kaupapa matua that is coming through the proposed approach. You want
No.
and the team, and we've come up with our own kōrero and written our own aspirations, so we've been co-writing. And one of the methodologies that we propose that we think as mana whenua, and I would like to mention that this is just Ngāti Toa, this is not Atiawa or Raukawa, although we have shared with Raukawa a little bit about it, but our methodology actually strengthens the methodology that has already been identified in the Grow Well document, and so using the Atua Matua framework, and just to let you all know the differences between Atua and Matua, so not to be confused with the Atua that one prays for in church on a Sunday. We're talking about environmental Atua when as Māori we speak about Atua. So our environmental Atua kind of are our links into our Māori to give us signs. They help us to understand things. So for example, the Atua Matua framework that we've proposed the methodology would be looking at the Atua and the link back to us, and using the inga wā, so our spaces of time. So you might all have heard about maramataka, which is a monthly calendar, or a monthly, kind of like a calendar. Well, we also use daily, so rātaka. We can also use, those are daily signs. We can use tohutaka, which is signs from the environment, specifically looking at manu, ika, the weather. So when I link that kind of back to a westernised perspective and theory, I think of that as something like the Shannon Index, where we go out and look, and I believe that the Greater Wellington Council uses it as well as most regional councils, where you go into the environment, you look at specific birds, and the specific birds that are in that quadrant or that area over a certain space of time. So that's exactly kind of what as Māori we do as well, but we just don't call it the Shannon Index, Shannon Diversity Index, we call it tohutaka. And we use that with weather patterns as well. So when we speak about rangi, we're speaking about the weather, but we are also speaking, when we say rangi, we say weather. When we're saying rangi nui, we're speaking about sky whara. So we're using time to link back to Atua, then to link back to us as a people. And so what that does, for example, if we were looking at, say, a roading issue, and there's, or needed to do something with pipes or whatever. Let's take pipes for running awa, something to do with stormwater issues. Okay, so if we were to use this framework, we would look at straight away we would start with the Atua. The Atua there would be Paramana Whenua, who's the deity in Te Ao Māori of fresh running water. So we would then look at how the new changes would affect the flow of the running water, that sort of thing. So when we're looking at this Grow Well document in our methodologies, we're trying to look at how we as Māori can strengthen the mahi that is already currently being worked on with Hamish, or the stormwater crew, which is Rita, or this model and framework actually can be applied across every single silo within council, or every department within council, because it's not just about water. So you can pick another atua if it's about tangaroa and coastal. So Paramana Whenua would be more likely for stormwater, the atua for stormwater, whereas tangaroa would more likely be the atua for the coastal mahi, given that tangaroa, or in our region, we have the female version, which is Te Moana Nui a Kiwa. You might hear it in stories, but Kiwa is actually the deity of the female version of tangaroa, but specifically within the Pacific Ocean, no further. So this is what our model kind of speaks to, and we as iwi think it strengthens the actual grow up and grow out model and methodology that has been proposed by council. Whether or not that goes whether or not that's included within a consultation document to then go out to community, and I'm not sure whether that would be helpful and that they wouldn't understand. And it would be hard to explain to lots and lots of people. You know, it's a bit easier to explain to you around the table now, but if we get hits, I'm thinking it's going to make Hamish's job a whole lot harder to explain it because I can't be beside him 24/7 to help him to.
So I suppose if I can put the question to Natasha, through the RMA process and the district plan changes, this methodology and their views will land inside there, wouldn't it?
To a certain extent, it can help. It will help shape those provisions, but a lot of those provisions will get very technical, and I think it's going to be a matter of making sure that we use that to shape what those provisions look like.
Right. Okay. Sophie, you.
Does that answer?
Oh, tēnā tātou. Well, thanks for the question, Sophie. I think Natalia's explained it really well to you, but I could just add that for us, it just highlights the importance of living in a more sustainable way with our environment. It prioritises our intimate relationship with the environment, and it actually aligns with the goals and priorities of one of your principles, our principles of the council, to have a thriving environment. So we're keen to have the discussion. We're ready to be fully involved in the growing well, the urban growth work, and all of the related things. And that's going to be the background of our approach towards it. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
So, Hamish, looking at the report itself, the language that is used in terms of our interface with mana whenua in this area is, for the lack of a better word, hesitant in terms of having had full engagement. I know capacity issues on both sides, more so on the mana whenua side, but you've got a pathway ahead for that to land better.
Yep.
Can you explain that?
Very much so. We've had some really good engagement recently and looking to continue that through consultation processes, but beyond that as well. So it's not just getting feedback formally through consultation, but working with our iwi partners right up into finalising the final strategy and what that looks like. Coming back to this as an approach, it's got the core components of it, but there'll be a strategy developed, a final strategy that pulls on these core components that'll come into play for early next year, and we'll be looking to work with our iwi partners throughout that process up to the end, and also coming back to yourselves as well, like we have leading up to developing the components of this, to have the discussion with both councillors and our iwi partners together about what those subsequent stages and post-consultation forming looks like.
Okay. Sophie, you've got anything?
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you, Natalia and Kirsten, for your answers to that as well, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for letting that kind of go through you to our mana whenua reps. Really appreciate that. My other question, and before I ask this question, I do just want to thank Hamish and the team for really taking into consideration that feedback around framing and that addition of proposed approach for enabling sustainable growth in Kapiti, and the whole kind of kaupapa of growing well. That really just has an image for me of this kind of tree that's like thriving and growing, and when we've had the Kapiti Climate Action Group present to us, that's what they've kind of used to frame up the things that they're speaking of too, of thriving. But some of the feedback I've had from them is that so far on this, from them seeing the agenda, is that where are the targets, where are the aspirations, where are the kind of levers that we can pull to enable us to get to a certain point in terms of our climate goals in Kapiti by a certain date. So at one of the workshops, I did propose a principle along the lines of enabling a climate or a carbon positive Kapiti by 2040, or a carbon neutral Kapiti by 2040. And so, yeah, just kind of wondering if in this proposed approach to growth isn't the right lever, or isn't the right kind of place for that, where is, I guess is my kind of question, like where is the right place for that conversation for us to be really aspirational about where these things intersect and how they make a difference in terms of our emissions here in Kapiti?
Chief Executive is jumping in.
LTP. What you just said in one little sentence is a massive undertaking, as you well know, and you cannot retrofit massive aspirations by virtue of just inserting it into a strategy or policy document. This council's done that to us before by committing to be carbon neutral by 2025 without any work supporting how that would be done. So my guidance to you is going to be, nobody disagrees with what you're saying we'd like to talk about. What I cannot support as in my role is that you can just insert stuff like that and then tell us to get on and try and deliver it. That is a significant conversation and has to be brought forward in its own right. What we're trying to achieve right now by 2025 is pretty major, and we're working towards it. So I think there are ways that you will work with the Mayor and your colleagues to make sure that we have that in our program of work, because there's a lot of informative work that would need to be done to get to making a decision about things like that.
Yeah, cool. I guess I just want to advocate for the continuation of work that's happening in that space, and also while I've got my mic on red, just completely agree with Councillor McCann's comments about the communications and the interconnectedness of all of these kaupapa, and thank you for referencing the Climate Emergency Action Framework in there as well as one of the strategies this intersects with and sits alongside. So yeah, want to thank the team as well for the integration of feedback. Yeah, it's good.
Councillor Coates.
Got about 3 questions, I think. The first one, how involved has Greater Wellington Regional Council been in developing the Regional Growth Framework strategy? And then I've got a follow-up to that one. Essentially, both how they interrelate, and the second question leads to the public transport aspect of it. So I'm just interested in their level of involvement.
I guess the Wellington Regional Growth Framework, the draft was available, and we've been developing this to reflect some of the components that were identified in that as part of that regional picture, and this will actually be developed up to feed into that and ongoing regional growth framework discussions. So this actually provides some of the picture that we didn't have previously for us under the current development management strategy, which was from 2007, and the current district plan were the only things that we had outlining how we're growing. There were some higher level aspirations in the Wellington Regional Growth Framework that we've actually taken on board and kind of shaped as part of this here, and that'll feed back into that process for Kapiti. But there's also an ongoing relationship, and Natasha might be able to talk about that, where we actually work as part of that regional leadership body around that work.
James, I know that the regional council staff are heavily involved.
Oh, so I've got a follow-up question, which will be to Wayne, but I just want to check with
No, I'm happy for you to continue on with your line of questioning.
So the reason why I ask, and I guess my follow-up question to you, Wayne, you made a comment not directly relating to this, but around Greater Wellington Regional Council's long-term plan and the investment or lack of, therefore, Kapiti and in particular public transport. So having personally been involved in all the workshops in Wellington and up here around this growth framework and the strategies and so forth, my concern is around my community will look at this and see all these aspirations around growth around transport nodes and then reflect our current transport position. So the question is around Greater Wellington's involvement in reflecting that sort of public transport aspect, which is critical when you look at encouraging development.
It's interesting, isn't it? Earlier we talked about have we got our own pieces of work connected, and I'm assuring you that as best we can, we do have. What you're alluding to and what we believe we're seeing is a real disconnect between growth strategies and any on-the-ground action plan, particularly in public transport, that mirrors that. So what I would say back is that certainly is my view, that there is a disconnect, and for reasons of affordability and priority, getting north of Waikanae, for example, electrified, getting better bus services and public transport doesn't appear to be their highest priority. So what we need to do is to utilise these pieces of work to better inform our advocacy for that. And if that fails, then we'll go to plan B.
Sure, but I know that they have been involved in setting their long-term plan. They've been involved in the discussion, so they're not. It's not that it's not known to them in terms of the issues. Sorry.
I was just going to say the consultation, of course, is for our community, but also for key stakeholders. So whilst there have been some discussions with regional council bodies as part of the regional growth framework, and also government agencies and some of the work around that related work. This is the opportunity, once we have the draft picture, to also seek their input and feedback as part of that, alongside those ongoing relationships at the regional growth framework and other places.
Natasha, are you ready to comment?
Yes, yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add in there that one of the regional growth framework projects is targeted at kapiti horowhenua and growth in these areas, in particular looking at infrastructure and other services that need to be required as that growth occurs over time. So that project is due to be starting next year. This piece of work is a key piece that needs to feed into that work, and that's why we've sequenced that large project in year 2. The other comment that I just wanted to make in terms of some of the infrastructure constraints, when it comes down to the specifics of how we've looked at what growth areas might be high, medium or longer term priorities. Some of those are, we've looked at a range of constraints to come up with that. There's technical work that supports that. And some of those constraints are infrastructure related. So for example, if we end up with some of the funding being successful from the Housing Acceleration Fund, that may mean that some of those priorities are able to change or be brought forward.
Tasha. The next one is around the consultation period, and I'm sorry I haven't signalled this with the staff and yourself, Wayne, in advance, but we've come under some criticism around a lot of criticism around the representation review and the consultation approach, which I believe is largely out of our hands due to COVID and the statutory timeframes. Is there any risk from a time frame perspective to extend the consultation out to the end of November, so allowing another week or so, because the feedback that I've been getting around the rep review is that it's just simply not enough time with everything else that people are dealing with, the limited period of 4 weeks. So I acknowledge there may be a desire to wrap this up so it can be brought back to a meeting to be then delivered to to another part of the puzzle. But I at least want to test that and just see whether there is the opportunity to extend it by, I was thinking to keep it easy. Obviously don't want to go into December, end of November.
So I'll respond to that, and then Hamish can add anything else if he thinks I've forgotten anything. So in terms of the, you've heard the Chief Executive talk about the careful sequencing and coordination there is between multiple pieces of work at the moment. One of the key sequences at this point in time with this piece of work is how it feeds into the upcoming district plan changes, which do have a statutory time frame around them. We've already looked at pushing out the timeframes for this work as pretty much as far as we can. So the actual consultation period, we've just got 5 weeks in there. Acknowledge it's not going to go as far in terms of what you're looking at as something much closer to Christmas. I think if we were to push it out to that extent, that really would be problematic in terms of being able to turn around give due consideration to the feedback we'll receive and be able to then feed that into the detailed work that needs to go into the district plan. So I appreciate the timeframes are going to be challenging for the community, particularly in the end of the year always gets a little bit more challenging for people. But I'm really hesitant for us to be extending it much longer, because I think that's going to cause some real problems for us down the track.
Okay, may I just add to you, Mr. Chair, that, and we don't know what else is going to get dumped on us all over the top of whatever dates we choose. There's going to be a Three Waters decision. There's going to be RMA stuff coming out, and so I suppose we just got to. I suppose they would say to us, just suck it up.
Suck it up. I must admit, I partly suggest that because on that same token, we also don't know what we may face over the next few weeks. So there, dare I say it, if there was another change in alert levels or so forth. But look, I take on board what you said. I at least wanted to test that. Certainly didn't suggest we go into December, but I'm just reflecting the feedback that we're hearing around. And this is a big piece of work. We want to get it right. As Councillor McCann has said, we don't want people to get the wrong messaging as well. I'll leave it at that because it's not a question. So,
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, a few questions from me. The first, on page 124, we talk about transport choices and improving how we get around and that sort of thing. I was wondering if that's an area where we need to be a bit more specific about some of the projects and things that we need in terms, especially when we're talking to, we talk about working with central and regional government, so we could talk about specifically about the electrification north of Waikanae, we could talk about issues like more interchanges for the expressway, which would enable some of the growth we've been talking about around, say, Otahanga or Raumati South or the Waikanae North area. I think, would that be a good opportunity to include some of that stuff in? Because obviously the feedback we get is that, well, you don't have the growth to support those things, but here we are saying we want to enable the growth to support the need for those things. So.
I think the intent of the document is later on we link to some of those key assumptions, like obviously rail into Otaki around supporting some of the growth proposed in there. But I guess just to recognise that there's a layer of detail and information of specifics that will come out of this document as part of the implementation plan as we work it through. So one of the things we're really keen to test is there are some elements in here, then hopefully that they pop out when you do read it. And there's a section in the back in the implementation section that does talk around some key infrastructure moves, as it were, like around some pipes and other bits and pieces, treatment plants and that might go with that growth. But what we want to hear back as well is what are the other components that might be part of that, and that'll actually inform what the picture up goes forward, alongside discussions around long-term plans and that other process as well, and to actually shape up what the action plan is going forward and feed into the plans that are already out there for that ongoing discussion. So there is an element of detail that's not in here and has been trying to keep out a little bit about specifics unless there's key things going on, but we certainly want to identify the opportunities or the challenges at those high levels to feed into that further work in detail.
Cool. My next question was on page, give me a second here, 139, where it's got the different types of housing across the district, and it goes with dwellings per hectare. Is there any reason why we specify dwellings per hectare rather than minimum lot sizes?
Minimum lot sizes don't really refer to not high rise, but medium density. So anything going up, minimum lot size is obviously a footprint of a building, so it doesn't really apply to any medium density foot size. So if we're talking about apartments and other things like that, so it's not really comparable. So dwellings per hectare dwelling can be an apartment or multiple forms. So it's a easier way to show the actual density for both up and the traditional greenfield, which is out. So lots by default tend to kind of be your suburban sprawl type scenario, but it doesn't actually account for the depth going up. And of course, a lot of our focus is around intensification of our key nodes areas, well-connected areas, and central locations. So that's what that dwelling per hectare can actually, as a measure, can kind of indicate that up and out scale as well.
Cool. And my final question, now I sort of appreciate that this only came out, I think, yesterday off the top of my head, was the final government policy statement on housing and urban development. I guess before this goes out to consultation, is it going to be sense checked against any changes that might have come through from the government's earlier, draft versions of that, and checking that we are consistent with that? Because obviously it's going to inform. I know it talks in there about, they want to see more of a focus on more urban redevelopment and regeneration, and less focus on, for greenfields to be well connected, but less focus in avoiding urban sprawl and that sort of thing. So are we going to, sense check this before it goes out, or do we sort of do that when it comes back from consultation?
Thank you. I think we can potentially look at doing a bit of both. Like obviously we're on a reasonably tight time frame in terms of getting the document finalised for consultation. The GPS has really only literally just landed in our inboxes. I think the general gist of it probably isn't too inconsistent already, but we can just make sure there's no major inconsistencies in there. I think that's probably going to be the key thing, but then we can have a much more thorough look over it as we also digest the feedback that we also get from public consultation. Just the last comment I'll make in terms of a little bit of inconsistency, I guess, that's coming through in terms of the government direction at the moment is certainly we're hearing a lot about the need for intensification and encouraging redevelopment. There's a challenge that's probably going to come to light in terms of the requirements under the National Policy Statement and urban development, and the capacity, the growth capacity that we have to enable needs to be realisable. And the reality is that for some of the intensification stuff, particularly where it's in existing urban areas, because you're often dealing with sites that are fragmented, multiple ownerships and things like that, it can be much harder to get realisable development within existing urban areas, that intensification. also intensification can end up being more expensive to get the height, the building code requirements and all of that. That may result in us being able to realise less development within the existing urban areas, and which may mean in order to meet the NPSUD we're going to have to encourage more green, enable more greenfields. So there's just a little bit of tension there that we'll be working through, but we need to understand what the capacity gap is first.
One final question was in
It's a final question.
final one. I just remembered this because it was sitting in my email in front of me. Was in the amended stuff we got through yesterday. I was curious as to why the likes of Raumati South, near the Expressway, Valley Road, South East Waikanae, Waitohu and Otaki have been removed from the high priority greenfields and shifted down to the medium priority greenfields.
That's just to reflect, I think, as Natasha referred to before, some of the information that we'd had and we hadn't reflected earlier around some of the potential constraints or challenges with some of those sites, but particularly if some relate to infrastructure, some can relate to other matters. That just hadn't been reflected from the earlier discussion that we'd had with you back in the briefing August the 30th, I think. So it was just looking to update and align with that, but also referencing, as Natasha said, some of that's subject to other mechanisms and ways of potentially removing and resolving some of those. So that timeframes and priority is something that we'll continue to look at and could potentially adjust and change over time as well, depending on the circumstances.
Cool. Thank you.
Councillor Holliday.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Nothing complex on my behalf, just two things I want a little bit of clarity around. Number 19, page 97, talks to is intended the community members who have the opportunity to share their views and growth approach directly with councillors following the close of consultation. I was just wondering what the idea might have been around that. Are we talking sort of open workshops or something like that? Any ideas at all?
Essentially, we're looking at a more informal arrangement around a hearing, but essentially it is a hearing, but we're just trying to see if we can make it less formal in a way that might be actually support further engagement with the community in a different way.
Yeah, it's in the pub.
But we'll still work through that and what might be practical, because we're just trying to achieve something that might mean that we can hear from people in different ways who we might not normally hear from. Again, just recognising some of the challenges about how we engage, but we just have to work through that a bit more. But we're looking to set aside some time to do that. Of course, time, as Natasha's mentioned, is challenging, but that's something we're just lock and load, and we'll work through the details of that. But something we wanted to include as part of a robust process.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I guess tying into that, I just wanted to talk to Ngāti Toa and Rokawa's strategies as well, because I can't vouch for the others, but I'd appreciate perhaps a one-on-one briefing session or a workshop to give us an understanding of that framework as such, to see how that fits, but also so if we're going to be talking to our communities in regards to this, having the familiarity of what that expectation is and what that understanding is, I think is very, very important. I just wanted to highlight that. The other thing was on page 133, we talked about our growth priorities and aspirations. I did bring it up when we were working through this, but I haven't seen it come through, but it's just around age-friendly communities. Obviously there's a piece of work, well, not obviously, but there's a piece of work coming up very shortly, and this alludes to what Mr. Maxwell was saying. It's not something that needs to be reintroduced, it's actually already in process. But the age-friendly communities was quite a big part of the electioneering process, if you like, with regards to Grey Power bringing that through, and is an international piece of work. But that's using that, albeit that being a part of our priorities and being part of our aspiration, I think is quite important, because as has been highlighted before, what works for various our elderly, if you like, tends to work generally across a lot of different areas in the community. Whether it be young mothers or whether it be people with mobility issues or anything along that sort of line. It can be quite a good framework, and it's already in process, so it can be something that's worked through at that time. But I just wanted to say it's not really included in here, but that may come back through the consultation process as well.
Councillor Provanov.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm just looking at page 130 39, in the bottom part of that table it says low medium density. In the first column it says buildings up to 3 to 4 stories, and then it says 2 columns over buildings 2 to 3 stories, and so obviously they're both urban areas. I don't quite understand the difference. That's my first question, the differences between the two. Appendix 1, 139, page 139.
I think if I'm reading this right, if you're just over the page, unfortunately the table's been truncated over the page. So what we have there is that low medium density as a kind of type of typology with 40 dwellings per hectare as its size. And then if you look down below that, you've got your low density, which is 20 per size, and that's buildings up to 2 stories. So one is kind of talking about 1 to 2 stories, which you might say is typical suburban. And then the next one is where you start moving up to having some townhouses. And I guess how it crosses over with that, the provisions under the framework and the proposed approach is that we're talking to crossing between that 2 to 3, so it spans those 2 areas.
Okay, so just give me half a tick. Okay. So this table's not going to be going out in the consultation document?
It's in the document, yes.
So then the way it's formatted.
Oh, yeah, not like that. We'll fix the formatting. Sorry, it's just page broken how it is.
Okay, so then the other part too is here you've got Timawana Road, Waikanae Beach. So I'm just wondering when you say Timawana Road, whether you actually include some of those other streets in that area. So I'm actually just trying to, it's not only that area there, but trying to actually, so when people look at this, they're going to say, well, I potentially live in this area or I don't. So how precise, do you actually mean solely Timawana Road, or do you actually mean the general
that reference is an indication to the local centre that's currently recognised in the district plan. So there will be a map that will go alongside this that you've previously seen, which should hopefully help gravitate, and those are just indicative areas. Some of them are a bit harder to explain because they're not on the corners or locations, which is why some of them have a few more roads. Yep.
If I could just add into that this document isn't the appropriate one to be drawing exactly down to individual property boundaries on. The intention here is for it to be indicative. The district plan is the appropriate mechanism for us to be looking at identifying exactly where some of these boundaries between these areas lie.
So then obviously a street is listed here, which to me is pretty specific. Whether it means that specificity or whether it actually includes that general area, I think that needs to be clarified.
So there is going to be, as Hamish indicated, there is going to be a map which will be provided as part of this document, which will helpfully clarify some of that.
Okay, thank you.
Natalia.
Sorry, that was in response ages ago to to Councillor Sophie, and that she had sent a question around climate change, and I was just responding back to say actually that the Atua Matua
so you know.
framework does align with that.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Your Worship, I would like to move resolutions 39 to 41. There being no more questions?
Any other questions? Yeah, Kirsten.
Oh, kia ora. Yes, just 2 things. I have asked for the background information about the data, the ethnicity, but also where all the people are coming from. So I've seen some of the information, but we've requested the background information. So we'd appreciate that as soon as possible. And then the other matter is to support one of the things that James talked about, and just to let you know that we're aware that this will have a potentially massive impact in Otaki in a number of ways, but there's a couple of things that are really important. One is the look and feel of the place could potentially change radically, and we want to make sure we retain the special feel of Otaki. And the other thing is that we've already experienced quite a massive impact on our local people being pushed out of the area, really, largely due to housing, and so it's going to be a challenge for us to ensure the growth is really well managed in terms of looking after our people so that they can stay in our area close to our marae, and that everyone else that's coming in, that we're looking after them and our environment at the same time. So just to bring it back to the point that James made, we are concerned about how much time is being given for the consultation and for us to work with this, work in partnership with the council. We think we can, I've heard what your response to that though, Natasha, and understand there are some other implications and factors which require it to happen quite quickly. We think if we can front load some of the work that we need to be doing starting next week, that will help us to ensure that we're, it is a robust process for us. So just wanting to share that request we're making to Hamish. Thanks.
Right. Oh, you've got another question, Councillor Coates.
I think Councillor Brevant, sorry, I'll just grab it while it's on. Councillor Elliott has suggested that she'd like to move. I was going to propose a minor amendment, which I don't mind if I'm not the mover or the seconder, but that was to include
for the editorial.
Councillor McCann to the editorial committee, particularly around the focus on housing, and to ensure that the wording in the document, so it's not changing the nature of the message in terms of the direction we're going, but just ensuring that the wording is consistent around that picture around housing. So, yeah.
Not a problem. You can just add that. We haven't had a seconder yet, so we'll just add that. Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, I know this has come up before, but I'm seeking clarification to see if there's been any changes since then. So a number of our communities have a special beach character designation, and so just clarification on whether this potential height changes will remove or basically nullify that beach, those special beach characters.
Natasha.
So that there is sorry, I can't quite see the question about specifically around how we're going to deal with that, or how that beach character zone gets dealt with, considering what the NPSUD requires of us, is something that we're getting advice on through the district plan process. In terms of what we're signalling here, in terms of along those beach character areas, the impact will be limited to the centre, the small shopping centre areas of those areas. I think, is that right, Hamish? Could you just
across some of the key local centres have been identified, and there is a level of intensification provided across some areas of urban areas as well.
But I suppose when that happens, you got the district plan changes and it will be contested. Yeah. Councillor McCann.
I'd be excited and delighted to second this.
Can you say that again? I love the choice of language. So it's been moved by Councillor Elliott with that amendment and the addition of McCann's name in the editorial group. And the other sections have been put back in, right? So, Councillor Elliott has moved and seconded by Councillor McCann. Are you right of intro?
Thank you very much. Look, firstly, I'd like to thank you. I'm going to keep this brief, firstly. So I'd like to thank you, Hamish and Natasha and team, for all your work with this. And it feels kind of nice to be moving this as a founding family member. We came here, there was nothing but dirt tracks and the farming down at Raumere. And looking at this plan as someone who's grown up here, I definitely give my full endorsement to this plan thus far. Of course, really, really keen to see what the community now brings in and think. And thank you, Kirsten. We have some very serious considerations about special communities of interest to think about. I love the ways that through planning for development we're able to secure our open spaces and imagine even more of them. And I want to thank you, staff, for your agility in the minor modifications you made around environmental protection and using our environmental features as to build around with care and consideration for their ability to continue growing and thriving. I really want to thank you, Natalia, too, for your really interesting kōrero about atua matua, which is a philosophy I've come across myself with the Te Uruwera management plan. And I think that's really exciting, so I am going to be talking to staff and ask about how our staff have training opportunities to learn how to do their framework management plans with atua matua. I think it's really, really important. It's the way our country's moving forward. So thank you all again. I would like our staff to everyone at the table to support this going forward. Thank you.
Open for debate.
I want to be really clear that I think that the team have produced a really good document, and we've gone through a number of workshops, and there's been good iwi involvement along the way, and a real so remembering when Deanna was providing feedback specifically around Otaki as an example, a real richness to that kōrero that differs from the general view that we don't necessarily understand, and that comes with history and knowledge. And so I wanted to acknowledge at the start that I think the document's great in the direction that we're going, but I raised the issue of consultation not only because of the representation review criticism that we've received, but the fact that there is a real fear amongst our community around the town changing, around our people being pushed out of the community, and the word ahika was something that came to the forefront of the kōrero around that. I want to be really clear that I don't see that as an opinion of NIMBYism from our community. Our community is very welcoming in terms of new people into our community and very inclusive, but more a concern of the people within the community being pushed out of the community. And so I tautoko the concerns that Kirsten and Deanna, when she was involved, and others have raised. I look forward to the discussion, but I'm concerned that this is a very important piece of work. It is a very meaty piece of work. We have limited time to engage with people at the same time as we're engaging on a range of other stuff. And Kirsten, to you and to others, would look to working with you within the community around trying to spread this message and engage with people and meet with people so that we get some really good feedback back on the plan, and also try to help get constructive feedback and set the scene so that people don't see this as council or the government just steamrolling in and having high-rise buildings throughout our communities and destroying the social fabric that is within our community. So I think it's really important we play a role in helping people understand that, that we are, whether forced is too strong a word, but by central government legislation to accommodate for this growth as part of their approach to addressing the housing issue that is not just a Kapiti issue but a national issue. So it's going to be an interesting few weeks, and I certainly know there's going to be some interesting discussions out there in the community just a couple of weeks ago, a local real estate agent hosted a hui wanting to talk about rural development and seeing what appetite there is around the rural community, around developing rural lifestyle blocks. And even in that discussion, there was a range of views from both ends of the spectrum. So I have no doubt that there'll be a range of views out there within the community about what good growth looks like. And so look forward to being a part of that. But yeah, genuinely concerned for my community in particular, and I just hope that we can provide some good feedback into that process that helps shape something that retains the essence of what's special to Otaki and Te Horo.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. I'm also going to endorse this because I think that not just as a Kapiti Coast community, but as Aotearoa New Zealand, we need to make some incredibly big changes to the scale of housing we provide. And just picking up a point that Councillor Coots made about, making sure that development doesn't wreck the social cohesion of our communities, I tell you, everyone at this table, that the one thing that will destroy social cohesion more than anything else is unaffordable housing. And just to put that in perspective, in the from August 2020 to August 2021, the average sale price for property in the Kapiti Coast increased by $117,000, a 16.8% increase. That was on top of a 16% increase for the 12 months preceding that as well. Now, no one can look at me and say that that's socially sustainable for any community. Now, there's going to be really hard discussions coming up with our community. We've seen this play out with Wellington's spatial plan, where that got particularly nasty when they were trying to figure out how to fit people in. But, Kapiti as a community, you go back to 1961, we had something like 11,000 people here. In 1991, we had 27,000 people here. In 2021, we have 57,000 people here. We're just predicting that we're going to do what we've done essentially over the last 30 years and the next. And I would wager that with that giant road that may open one day, sometime, at some point, God willing, that will be a conservative number. And we can't put a sign up there saying, sorry, we're full, because the poor access we've had via the coastal road hasn't put people off wanting to move here. So when you open up a giant road, people are definitely going to want to move here. So we need to make sure that actually we provide accommodation for them. Otherwise, this housing crisis is just going to continue to wreak havoc on families, on our economy, and we just need to fundamentally have a step change in how we're addressing it. So I fully endorse the approach and the bold decisions that we've got ahead of us, and look forward to seeing what the feedback is on them.
Councillor Holliday.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm not going to rehash what's already been said. Other than to say I endorse all the comments that have come around the table so far, especially what Gwyn's just talked to as well. But look, I just wanted to make a note. Look, this is another piece of work that's had a long lead-in, as we well know, and just the community is wondering what it is we do with our time. This has been ongoing as well since about October last year, if not sooner. And obviously we've been through workshops, but there's also the reading aspect of all this and getting ourselves up to speed, not just with this documentation, but the related documentation that ties into it, both through central government. But one thing I just want to note is that the importance of keeping our special identity and personalities of our district. Yes, they will change, but we have to have that fundamental feeling of who we are as Kapiti, and our individual different areas as well. I think it's exceedingly important. And just want to express my concern, as I have through the process, around the intensification close to the coast with regards to climate change as well. And I'm talking around the townships that are close to the coast, being Paraparamu Beach, Raumati South, those sorts of areas as well. Other than that, I'll certainly be supporting this moving forward, and certainly look forward to seeing what comes back from our community.
Councillor McCann.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to endorse the comments that Councillor Compton made. I think they were very wise. And another wise character once said, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And for us, the challenge is trying to make sure that we articulate what is good for our whole community is also good for us individually. And I think Councillor Compton hit that on the nail on the head, that if we can't house our community, that in effect is actually bad for all of us, even at an individual level. And this step change in the various documents, including the strategy, is absolutely required as we head towards completely unaffordable housing. But at the same time, and Councillor Hanford has raised this a number of times, we need to make sure that we're also doing this in a sustainable and environmentally friendly manner, which I think is really important. And as we've gone through this process, and thank you for the staff for taking us through what is a long journey, we've made sure that our principles around making sure that housing in our environment and our communities are livable, they're walkable, that we're retaining green space, all of those things are really, really important. I'm glad they're all reflected in this document. And finally, the challenge then is how do we communicate? And I've certainly rattled on about that. And that means that as councillors, I think we need to be really actively engaging and leading our community in this discussion, but then also actively listening to make sure that we haven't missed anything out over this year of work that we've put in. So that's the challenge in front of us, is not to sit back and just let it happen, but to engage with people and make sure that they understand that they are part of this journey. Because something Councillor Compton and I both say is that change is coming whether we like it or not. So either we play a role to make sure it's the best possible change for all of us, or it will just happen in haphazard ways that we can't control. So I commend the staff on the great work that's led us to this point and fully support the recommendations.
Councillor Hanford.
Oh, kia ora, another hard bit of commentary to follow there from Councillor McCann. And my apologies too for missing out on a bunch of the debate. I was on a call with the other three New Zealand young people who have been selected for APEC Voices of the Future, and a very similar conversation actually happening within us four New Zealand delegates who will be participating in this international corridor. So it's amazing to see the locality then kind of coming back into this space. And I know for sure that, I mean, Councillor Halliday said it, Councillor McCann said it, that they took all of the responses from people around this table, and I'm sure I could say the same because I trust that everyone here is thinking about this in the right way, centred around and towards our values, and kind of carrying on Councillor McCann's point about making sure that we're, taking care of people who are in Kapiti now and those people who will be moving to Kapiti and making sure they have a roof over their head. I think as well, extending that same kind of approach and kaupapa to the people who will live in Kapiti in the future, the people who aren't yet born, the people who will call Kapiti their home in 100, 150 years. And that's also what we're here to do as well, is to set up that kind of groundwork and to lay that foundation for those generations that will follow on from us. And a couple of words I've got down here are the fact that we have a huge responsibility. We have a huge responsibility to do this right, both by the people who are here now and by the people who will occupy this whenua in the future. And we also have a huge opportunity. And that opportunity, as Councillor McCann's already said, is around walkability, it's around sustainability, resilience, it's around social well-being and social cohesion, and there are so many amazing kind of buzzwords that we could all throw into the mix, but it's a positive thing, and growth can be positive, and it feels really like we are trying to capitalise on that in the best possible way. So yeah, we've got to grow well, and I think as the document is named, I think thank you for all of the work that staff have done on this, and I think it's been done really well, and I can't wait to hear from our community. One thing I would like to note too is that it's important we hear from all sectors of our community through this next stage and really make an effort to hear from all sectors of our community, ensuring that mana whenua feel like there's a true partnership with this approach, that there is kind of a duality within that, making sure we hear from our young people, our disability community, our climate advocates in the district, people who are advocating for cycling, for walking, people who are conservationists. All of those different perspectives are really important. So we'd just encourage the public to really understand the importance of what we're doing right now for future generations, but also for all of us here and now. It's got to work for all of us, so we all have to feed into it.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott, right of reply? No? Okay, the recommendations has amended on the board there. Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor McCann. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Thank you. Thank you, Hamish. Now we've got 8.4 amendments to the council delegations to the chief executive and staff. Welcome.
To introduce Janice, please.
Janice, sorry.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor, kia ora koutou. I'd just like to take this opportunity to introduce Kerry Wright to you all. Kerry started the day before we went into the last lockdown as Senior Legal Counsel, taking up a role left vacant some time ago by the departure of Nicola Tutt. And Kerry is here today to speak to this paper because nothing like out of the frying pan into the fire. This week she is Acting Governance and Legal Services Manager while Sarah takes a well-deserved break. So having introduced Kerry, I will hand over to her to take you through the paper.
Welcome to the den.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time today. I am going to take this paper as read and open up for any questions in relation to the proposed amendments to the scheme of delegations.
Really good. Right. Well done. You learned it.
I'd like you to train me.
That's not possible. Right. No questions.
Can't let that go. While you're taking it as read, for lay people, which we'll all put our hands up as, are there any concerns that you see that the public would raise about us handing over any additional powers and any concerns that you might have?
Thank you very much for that question. The changes we are proposing reflect changes to the staffing structure. So I wouldn't see any concerns from members of the public in relation to the proposed amendments.
Thank you very much.
Right. Councillor Holliday.
Through you, Mr Chair. Look, just reading through the document, I note a lot of this is around the restructuring of the place and spaces, or the place and spaces restructure. I'll just, it hasn't really been discussed as to why the restructure was required, or it's all happened, but I was wondering if perhaps there's a possibility of having some context around it.
Happy to have a chat to you in another session about that, Councillor. More than happy that, mostly it's different job titles and slightly different team structure.
Right. No other questions. I'm going to move recommendation 9 and 10. Can I have a seconder? Councillor McCann. I'm going to put it. Recommendations 9 and 10 moved by the Mayor and seconded by Councillor McCann. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Carried. Item number, thank you. Item number 8.5, notice of motion. Councillor Compton.
I guess the question is, how do you want me to introduce this? I presume we might have printed copies coming around, or
We can do. Yep.
So just while they're being handed out, just to kick things off, I guess the point of this notice of motion isn't about having a decision here and today about whether to stop or proceed or make changes to the Gateway project. It's about giving us a process to get an update on everything that's happened with it to date, and then once we get the independent review back and we can receive it and we can consider it and respond to it, then we can actually have an informed view about what we're going to do going forward, because I think we need to acknowledge that the independent review could potentially raise issues that we need to consider. So that's essentially the purpose of it. There's two reports here. That first one, as I said, is the update. The second one would be an opportunity where you could say, no, we don't want to go ahead. You could say, yes, we would like to reconfirm our decision. And we could say, actually, let's go back and tinker with some things based on a more informed position that we'll have then, thanks to what we'll have back from the independent review. There's also, obviously, that first report asks about options on pausing work beyond the stream works that are underway, because I think we all recognise that those stream works are, A, they're really important, but B, they're already consented, they're already contracted, there are literally shovels in the ground and concrete blocks about to get put in there. So it's recognising that work is important regardless of what you think about the rest of the project, so it's about acknowledging that going forward. So that's sort of the gist of it, and happy to take any questions before we go into debate later.
Any questions? Councillor McCann.
Kia ora. Thank you for raising this, and is this really a question to the CE? Because I raised it with the CE because there had been a group of councillors formed to look at the project and help the business case and the case around it. In following that full process, I raised the issue about how we would ensure the situation that we ended in was not repeated, that we could make sure that we did a better job of consulting, engaging and going through a process. And I raised the issue with the CE about a report and how we could do that, and the CE informed me of the purpose of the current investigation report, whatever you want to call it. So the purpose of that report, though, was to ensure that in future there were the issues that we were facing were not repeated. It wasn't to look at anything within the current structure that forced us to reevaluate the decision. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. It's a lessons learned for the future.
Yeah, which concerns me then that we're then, as councillors, looking at this notice of motion, not interpreting what the purpose of that report was for. And I know we've discussed it, so I'm a bit confused at how that report should be informing us to reevaluate the decision that we've already made based on the best evidence that we had.
So I would make the point that this table didn't set the terms of reference for that report. That wasn't initiated by us, so I think we have a prerogative to decide how we use that when it reports back to it. I'd also make the point that on the 1st of March, under the Protected Disclosures Act, myself and Councillors Pravanov, Halliday and Randall wrote to the Auditor-General to request an investigation into this, and the Auditor-General came back saying that they were going to look at the results of this report. So I think, acknowledging that there's interest in it, it's been passed on to our auditors, I think we owe it to ourselves and our community to pause and take a breath and make sure that if there are findings that come out of that report that could potentially require us to take different actions or different escalations as appropriate, we need to make sure that we don't drive the council bus so far down a cul-de-sac that it gets stuck there and we can't reverse it out.
Follow up with that, if I may.
Ask the question.
The question then is that given the report is on the way, has our legal team, who may or may not be in the room, I just took my glasses off, seen the report, and is there anything in there that meets the criteria that Councillor Compton is talking about?
I haven't seen the draft, so I can't comment on that.
Right. Councillor. Oh, come on. Councillor Elliott.
Look, can I just seek two pieces of clarification? Firstly, I just wondered, notice of motion 1 refers to an independent review of the Kapiti Gateway to Irihi project. I understood it was explicitly an independent review of the Kapiti Gateway to Irihi process.
Chief Executive.
That's probably more accurate wording. As we do, continuous improvement, when there has been a decision that people felt was contentious for whatever reasons, as were raised through that process, can we learn something from it and make improvements to the way we do things? So yeah, process is a fair word.
So just as a follow-up to that, the material within the report then would not be able to be used the way it's proposed here, because the report is not a review of the Kapiti Gateway. It was a review of the consultation process and the procurement process and all the processes up to the point that we made the decision to accept. And I have another question.
Yeah, I think that's already been covered, but in the discussion between elected members, that it is not a review of the project, and obviously Councillor Compton has talked to his views on that.
Can I just speak to that as well? So just reading off the website, it says the Kapiti Coast District Council has engaged consultants Martin Jenkins to undertake an independent process review of Te Urahi, the Kapiti Gateway project. So you can interpret it either way. I mean, it's a review of a process of the project, but you can take it either way.
Okay, look, anybody else with a question? Councillor? Yeah.
But I just have as a final question. Your Worship, I requested a report back from you on the yourself and the C on the 20th of September, and you noted that no resolution would be needed and that the report would be okay to do, and we just wait back to hear from the CE as to when that report will be ready. Could I have an update on that?
Well,
given it's a report for on an update on the consents process.
I would request that you wait.
Oh, wait, okay.
Next, Councillor Coates.
Aspects of the notice of motion refer to reporting back on delays and changes and so forth, and obviously the costs. Could you just confirm that is actually reported back through our activity reports? Each individual project, including Te Urahi, are reported back on, and also by the project lead via email to elected members?
Yes, they are. Yes.
Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm actually not asking a question as such, as I'm a supporter of this motion, but I just did want to clarify some things. Look, the report coming back, I think needs to be considered as an aspect of the motion, not the reason for the motion. And the reason I say that is that this motion was put forward before we had an understanding that the report was coming back as such. So part of the reasoning for this motion was to instigate some framework, if you like, in a timely manner around not just the report, but some other aspects as well, which have been somewhat there's been some time issues around. And I refer to the fact that the project is scheduled to be opened in April 2022. In my layman terms, I guess, the concern I have is we're heading towards that date, and I'm not seeing that we're going to potentially make that date, which does change a lot of things, because there were some quite firm views put in place back when the concept at the last vote on this around ensuring that those timeframes were kept to. Now, yes, we are in COVID, but we know that there's a lot of changes in the work environment with regards to procurement, with regards to product, all those sorts of things. So what we're asking for is a pause, fundamentally, and not a reassessment, but an update of costs, an update on perhaps a revised time frame for when this project potentially can be completed. And while we're waiting for that information to come, just a bit of a tie-ho on signing off the potential contractor if that position comes up while we're getting those updates as such.
You got a question there somewhere?
No, I don't. That's what I said at the beginning of this. It's just more some clarity around my position as to why this is why we're putting this forward as well, if you like. Reinforcing Councillor Compton's position, there might be questions that are wanted to be asked in regards to my view as well, as a co-signer to this motion. So that's and look, another aspect as well. You know, we've got.
So have you got a question to ask?
No, I don't, Your Honour.
Well, can you just keep it and you keep it for your debate?
Mr.
Question, you got Bernie Randall, you got a question?
No, I just wanted to say that I will second the motion.
Okay, noted. Right, Councillor Pravanov, you got a question?
So thank you, Gwyn, for being part of putting this forward. It's been raised that this is covered off in the activity reports, and that is looking backwards, and they are every quarter. Can you give your reasons why you think it's important to actually request this information now, please?
So I'll direct members to point 112, which is an update to the business case to reflect possible impacts of any additional costs from resource consent delays, construction section inflation since February 2021, and any other changes as needed. So through those activity reports, we don't get updates to the business case of any of those impacts. We get what that static position is in time, which for the 30th of June 2021 was $354,000 versus a full year budget of $255,000. So that would be something different from what we get through from the strategy and operations quarterly activity reports. And it also includes the options bit around pausing any work so we can make sure we get that the independent review back. We can review it properly. We consider any appropriate actions we need to take from that. Because one of the, if there is something that is quite significant in there, I think we need to give ourselves the opportunity by taking a breath and making sure we get this right so it stands up to scrutiny, so that, when we think about the manner of the name that's been attached to it, that we've made sure that the process for this, everything about it, is completely above board and done properly, so that we're treating the name Te Orohi itself with the respect it deserves, so it doesn't get tarnished by anything that's potentially gone wrong.
Councillor, who else has got a question? Councillor Pravanov, you finished?
Oh, no, sorry.
Councillor Elliott, you got a question?
Yep, I'm wondering, as we've got 4 co-signatories, and one's moving 1 second, if the other 2, Councillors Pravanov and Halliday, would be interested in entertaining an amendment in order that this become a bit more workable. It's quite, there are some substantial problems with this resolution as it's written that I've identified that are a bit of a stumbling block. And so I wondered if you would consider an amendment.
Doesn't seem to be any takers on that. Look, Gwen, do you want to move it now? And you got a seconder, Bernie Randall, you're a seconder?
Yep.
Bernie Randall. He said yes, he was.
Yep, that's right.
Okay. Gwen.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, that this notice of motion isn't about whether to proceed or stop with Te Orohi. It's about requesting 2 separate reports. The first is a formal update on the project with the updates to things like the business case that, as I pointed out before, we don't get through our normal standard reports. And the second would be the opportunity for council to reconsider whether or not to continue, especially given any findings from the independent review, which we're still waiting to formally receive and respond to. It would ensure that we're able to carry out the work that's already underway on the stream, which, as I said, is really valuable work. We recognise the remedial work to the stream needs to be undertaken. And I think it's really important to separate that off from this project, because it was sort of, I guess, almost held hostage to it in some regards when we considered this previously. As I said, I want to avoid us being in a position where we get down a cul-de-sac of commitments, whether it's consents, whether it's contracts, whether it's construction started, where if we do find out about a significant issue of this, that we're still able to reverse the bus back out of the cul-de-sac. We've already stranded one literal bus this triennium up in Otaki, if you remember, so let's not do it with a metaphorical one as well. We owe it to our community to make sure that every dollar of theirs that we spend is well spent, and that the processes behind that will appropriately carried out, especially when we're asking for those significant rate rises over coming years. And we've already seen we've had delays to the resource consent where it's been withdrawn and relodged. I'm aware that an RMA barrister has been in contact with affected parties and they've been in contact with council, so there's potential litigation risks. I even had a call from someone the other day who was making the point that we publicly notified a digital sign on Kapiti Road, so they were sort of wondering, well, are you going to be, surely you'll publicly notify this? And I said, look, not my decision. That's the question for the independent planner. But as the applicant for this, and given the perception is that we're marking our own homework, even if we do engage it, use an independent planner, we need to make sure that everything is very transparent and clear for the community. as notice of motion, while the report was intended as a lessons learnt report, as I mentioned, I've raised many of the concerns I had with the Auditor General over this, and I think it's really important that we actually have the opportunity that if that report does turn up something that gives us pause for thought, that we actually have the time to have that pause for thought about this, and that we're not compromised in any sort of way by any other commitments we've entered into. And so whether you voted for or against Te Urahi proceeding at our previous council meetings on this, I'm asking that at the very least you allow both council and our community to pause and take a breath on this so that we can make sure we're making we either reconfirm the decision to proceed, or we make amendments, or we don't proceed, and we're doing it with the latest and best possible information available to us. I believe that we need to make sure that we get this absolutely right in every sort of way, that we've got the correct processes, that we've got the appropriate level of probities that's been practiced, and that the numbers stack up for this.
Right. Councillor Compton has done his right of intro. Open for debate. Councillor McCann.
Kia ora, through you, Mr. Mayor. And I recognise the passion in Councillor Compton raising this issue, but what I don't see is that we do have any new information from which to change the direction of travel. I do know that our community has had a very robust and sometimes impolite and angry conversation, which involved a lot of misinformation. But while we're trying to hang a change in direction or a pause on the report, I have to note that we had discussions as councillors. I certainly had them with the Chief Executive on what the purpose of that report was and what it was going to achieve. And while it's unfortunate that we don't have any legal representatives who have read the report, and we can't then refer to it and say that there is nothing in there that is going to meet your criteria, I'm pretty confident that given the parameters of that report, it is not the smoking gun that people have been looking for in X-Files or anywhere else. And I can't see why we should relitigate a decision where we spent a significant amount of time and effort trying to make it right. And I refer to the work that many councillors put in, of which I was one, working with all of the community, including, I might say, Martin Halliday, who made quite clear his opposition to the process, but was willing to take part in a councillors group to ensure that we heard from all the community and took on board their concerns, which we did, and the final proposal did not look like the initial proposal. We went through that process and we voted on it. And while Councillor Halliday and I were on different sides of that vote, one of the things that we can both agree on is that we did everything we could to take on board all the information from our community, listen to iwi, listen to environmentalists, listen to people who are economists, and it's not a simple answer when we look at budgeting. It's not just about a business case, it's about what's good for our community and being able to tell a story and demonstrate that we're just not a single cultural community. I think this project is actually going to, when we look back, be something that we should be proud of. But I know that those projects are often the ones that have the most blood, sweat and tears. But I can't agree with Councillor Compton that there's any information that I can see that should give us pause to change the decision that we've already made. Sometimes, if there was, Councillor Compton, I would join you, but I haven't seen that.
Councillor Holiday.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Look, taking on board Councillor McCann's comments, with the report, I'm not specifically looking for a smoking gun with regards to the current project. It's more about the process, and that's a completely different conversation. In my views, that is a different conversation. Look, this is, and perhaps I'm going to be repeating myself a little bit now, this is not about rehashing the whys and why nots, but covering from my end the timeframes involved. We haven't been updated I think, since we've made this decision, fundamentally, we've got a resource consent timeframe, its content and how that impacts the target date of April 2022, when the consent is only just the second consent, it's only just been lodged. The business case and how it relates to that resource consent, and is there now a firmer understanding of what the ongoing financial OPEX will look like? I don't think again, my personal opinion, we weren't given that clear understanding. There was very, I dare say vague, but it wasn't set down that this is how we're moving forward in this project. The Māori iwi influence has been brought into the equation with the gifting of the name, but we haven't seen the quantification of what does that look like. High level of community, and also there's the high level of community interest here, which and I said this at the time, I'm concerned about the reputational aspect of the project and how that impacts on council as well. So I'm asking for a pause and an update so we can have a clear understanding of exactly where this project is at. If it's on track, fantastic. If it's not, we can ask those questions. But that can be done all before we sign a contract with regards to the physical building aspect of it. The development of Te Tuku Stream has always been on the cards. It's always been a front runner of this project with regards to things that are being done, and that is already started, which is great, but the other aspect hasn't, and I think we have time to take pause and perhaps even reevaluate when that target opening date might be. That's all I want to say about this. Thank you very much.
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I suppose the reason I have supported this this piece of work is mainly the lack of good updates, and that's being provided that assurity that it is on track. There's obviously been delays, and the business case was moving with its figures, and it's basically to understand that the cost structures and the revenues haven't changed again. We just haven't had that information. This, update should be standard practice in terms of any project. That's why these are being requested, because we haven't been provided with them.
Councillor Horrell.
Yeah, I can recall that we have had updates through this project. I've been around this council table in various ways, including the chair of the community board for 14 years, and I've seen a lot of projects come and go, and I think we've had more updates on this than we have others. And in terms of this proposal that's in front of us today, I've never seen anything like this with another project. Projects go through delays, they go through changes, and I would remind some councillors that we're not the ones who sign the tender document. And Councillor Compton's talked about tarnishing this project with getting things wrong. In my view, I can't see that we've got anything wrong since we approved this project around this table with a majority vote. And one thing that would tarnish this project is to second guess it, is to interfere with the project. We've made a commitment to do this. We've had a wonderful blessing of the first part of this project, and the streamworks and bridge were always part of this project. Our funding from government would be impacted if we second guessed. And to me, this goes further, Councillor Halliday, than pressing a pause button. This gives an option that we reconsider. And it refers to a review that's about a process, not about the project. So to me, I won't be supporting this today, and I would encourage my fellow councillors not to support it either. That's not to mean that we shouldn't get an update, that we shouldn't be informed about the project, but supporting these today goes further than that, and that makes me very uncomfortable.
Anybody else? EV representatives?
Ngāti Toa supports the Te Uruhi, and we wouldn't be, we don't get a say in this anyway, but we're with the council to continue with Te Uruhi, especially given after all the effort that was put in by council and mana whenua, but also because of all the whakaharu that this is already cause for mana whenua and for our babies, and then to turn around and take it back off us is a bit of an insult. But in saying that, it's not our decision, but we totally support what we've always supported in the start, which was for this to go ahead. Kia ora.
Right or reply? Councillor Compton.
Thank you. First, to respond to the saying that this is a change of direction, it's clearly not. It's clearly two reports, an update, and then the opportunity to reconsider things. So make sure that if we're going to reconfirm, if we're going to go ahead, we've got all the relevant information that we need. And I'd also reiterate that as councillors, we didn't set the terms of reference for that review. It didn't even come back to this table for approval before it was put out to Martin Jenkins. I had to even push to get interviewed by the reviewer for it, and I only got a last-minute Friday afternoon group discussion about it, which I was not particularly happy with. Now, I would also say that the Auditor-General thinks that this review is important enough to take a look at. So why won't councillors around this table stop and pause and have a look at it? You know, that's a pretty high level of interest in this, and I think we owe it to our community to make sure that we ensure that level of review takes place of it. You know, thinking back to just earlier this month, this project was identified as one of the leading causes as to why our council recorded its lowest residents' opinion scores, and it was the ability to make good decisions. And the ability to make good decisions, in part, is determined by the quality of the information that we get and the probity of the processes that inform it. And if there are questions about that are going to be addressed by this report, then we owe it to ourselves to actually receive that and give us the time to consider that in case it has an impact on it. It's a basic tenet of good decision making. As I said earlier, it's not a vote about whether or not to proceed. It's getting a structure in place to first give us and our public an update on where things are at in the project. And then after we've received and considered and respond to that independent review, only then do we get to reconsider the path forward. So, again, I would say to everyone, whether you've been a supporter or opponent of Te Arohi up to this point, you know, listen to the overwhelming feedback we've had from our community. At the very least, we owe them the chance to think about this again. You know, I think we all acknowledged around this table the importance of this to iwi. That was passed unanimously by this table. But we really need to think about if the review comes back and it's critical, or if something comes out that finds issues, the Auditor-General investigates and finds issues. If residents judicially challenge us about whether decision-making at this table or possible resource consent or anything else, those are all situations that are going to impact on the manner of this thing, on this project. You know, so rather than suggesting that this notice of motion disrespects what mana whenua have provided, it does the reverse, and it's about ensuring that we're acting responsibly as governors with the gift that's in our care. So I sort of appreciate that counting around the table, it's not going to pass, but I would sort of implore you to have one last consideration about whether you want to, you know, do the right thing for the right reasons in the right way on this.
Right. The notice of motion moved by Councillor Compton, seconded by Councillor Bernie Randall. All those in favour say aye.
Aye. Aye. Excuse me, Mr Mayor, could I ask one question?
No, you can't.
It was more around a council.
I just said no, you can't. We are in the midst of just moving this, and all those in favour say aye.
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 So, all those against? No. Division. So the ayes, put your hands up, and we know Councillor Randall will take.
Those in favour, Councillor Halliday, Compton, Pravanov, and Randall, I will assume, yes, has given it a tick.
All those against?
Councillor Hanford, Buswell, Coots, the Mayor, Councillors Holborough, McCann.
The motion is lost. But in saying this, I've got the signal very clear that councillors are wanting some information around this, and I think that's a legitimate call. Can I use my prerogative of the chair to request the chief executive to give us a briefing and update on the consent process on the Te Arohi and on any changes? And secondly, so what impacts of these changes will have on the project's business case? And can you tell us, I know just putting it on you, whether a time, because we want it sooner than later.
So we can easily schedule an update for members with regard to where we're at in the resource consent process. We're not at a point where there's an update to the business case, but we can update you on how the timeline will look running forward from that, and we can probably mid to late October we could look to schedule something.
Okay, thank you very much. Item number 9, confirmation of minutes. The minutes of council meeting 17th May 2021. Any issues around that? Otherwise, can somebody move that the minutes of the council meeting of 17th May 2021 is accepted as a true and correct record? Pardon? No, I'm taking it separately. Move Councillor Holbrook, seconded Councillor Hanford. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Carried. The minutes of council meeting 26th of August. Any issues with that? No. Can somebody move? Councillor Holbrook, Councillor Hanford. All those in favour say aye. The minutes of council meeting 2nd September 2021. Councillor Buswell. You move it. Seconded. No, Councillor Holbrook. Councillor Holbrook. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Again, carried. Now that brings us into that. Can we take a break now? We take lunch.
Yeah, you probably should.
I think we should. Thank you very much. Lunch break. Come back at 2 o'clock.
Lunch is ready.